Hello everyone! I'm excited today to present to you what else I saw in March that I didn't already tell you about. I've got a lot of good movies to cover, and I hope you enjoy hearing about them. And just so you know, if you happen to notice a sudden outfit change, that's because I'm splitting the filming of this video into a couple sessions. First, because this one's going to be a bit longer, and that's the best way to manage it. And second, because today's actually Monday, and the month isn't even over yet. Movie number one is 1941's Pimpernel Smith. Leslie Howard co-produced, directed, and starred in this Scarlet Pimpernel-inspired pre-war film set in the spring and summer of 1939, in which a group of university students join their absent-minded professor on an archaeological dig in Europe, unaware that he's actually the secret mastermind orchestrating a series of escapes from Nazi Germany. Pimpernel Smith also stars Frances L. Sullivan and Mary Morris. It's a smart and, at times, lighthearted film, but it's serious when it needs to be, and Howard definitely sticks the landing at the end, sending a powerful message to the Allies. I enjoyed the film, which is lively and somewhat daring, though I do wish we'd gotten to see more disguises, as that's one of the most fun things about the Scarlet Pimpernel. I also think this is an instance where the film is even better if you know some additional facts about the man behind it. The protagonist of this film is modeled after Baroness Orczy's fictional hero of the French Revolution, Sir Percy Blakeney, a role that Leslie Howard played in 1935. His Horatio Smith is an unpolished, blunt professor, calling to mind Professor Henry Higgins, who he played in 1938's Pygmalion. And he's an intellectual and a pacifist who reluctantly gets involved in brutal conflict, calling to mind the cerebral, mild-mannered characters he played in 1936's The Petrified Forest and 1939's Gone with the Wind. You might say a good deal of his work in the 30s was leading up to this moment. Howard himself was thin and relatively soft-spoken, not the tough, aggressive type, though he was no coward. He enlisted and fought in World War I. His calling was acting, not fighting, but he was more crafty than people gave him credit for. He took what he knew and used it to make a passionate statement regarding the state of the world and to do something about it himself. He got killed in the process. What Leslie Howard was doing when the plane he was traveling in was shot down by the Luftwaffe in 1943 is unclear, and continues to be the subject of speculation and debate. There are rumors that he was involved in some kind of intelligence work, or he may have been doing something equally clandestine while meeting with other propaganda filmmakers and gathering support for the Allied cause. Whether or not Howard's plane was targeted because the Germans considered him a prominent threat or they wanted to demoralize the British, we may never know for sure. He was killed just before the US release of his final film, The First of the Few, another fine war drama Howard produced, directed, and starred in as the designer of the Spitfire aircraft. He was just 50 years old. Leslie Howard is a man of whom one could say there was more to him than met the eye, and the same could be said of the character he plays in this film. I wouldn't go so far as to say Pimpernel Smith is autobiographical in any way, but I do believe that Howard felt a personal connection to the story and its protagonist. His death was another tragic loss of World War II, but he left behind some memorable performances that reflected his own personality and outlook, and the final scene of Pimpernel Smith may be his greatest moment on film. Movie number two is 1991's Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. I've reviewed it before, but that was several years ago, so here's my take on it this time around. If I end up repeating myself, well, I guess my opinion's consistent. Star Trek VI is a great film. Not my favorite in the series, but superlative to the others in some ways, and so the original cast Star Trek films were able to go out on an extremely high note. There's a lot going on in this one, and I think that's part of the reason why I don't have quite as much fun with it. It's a little bit taxing. The clever and complex script was co-written by director Nicholas Meyer, who was at the helm for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and you can definitely tell in the way this was filmed and in the gloriously nerdy literary reference pile-up with Christopher Plummer's villain Chang spouting Shakespeare right and left, which is just wonderful, Spock repeating Sherlock Holmes's logic, and Kirk quoting Peter Pan at the end. To me, the beginning is a bit heavy, with all the characters to introduce, and the grim discussions of diplomacy, and the dredging up of hard feelings, and so it takes a while for things to warm up. The tense dinner with the Klingons is great, though, and the assassination sequence with the crazy zero-gravity and magnetized boots element is the point where things really catch fire for me. I especially love the trial, the way it's scripted, acted, filmed, edited, the whole package. Other highlights include Iman's fascinating performance as the shapeshifter, Captain Sulu and the Excelsior coming to the rescue, and the scene where everyone's pulling out translation books to help Uhura communicate with the Klingons. And still, one of my favorite lines comes from an exasperated McCoy as he and Spock do surgery on the torpedo, and Chang sarcastically is blasting them with Shakespeare quotations over the intercom. There's a strong emphasis on time in this one, just like you'd have in an Earthbound mystery, and while it's kind of strange to suddenly make us so aware of the time of day and space, it is a creative way to add more tension. Cliff Idleman's music score is quite different too, kind of alarming and scary, which fits the film's mood. Star Trek II was the one that made me hide behind the couch as a kid, but this one's just as intense and even more violent. Having watched all 6 films within 6 weeks or so, I think this might be my favorite film series. I like every entry with no exceptions, and I mean no exceptions. Despite some minor discrepancies here and there, there's impressive continuity and cohesion throughout the whole thing. The music and visuals are almost always stunning, and it's just so awesome that the entire cast came back every time, and additional actors, with the exception of Kirstie Alley, came back to play their characters when needed. It is bittersweet to see the adventure come to an end in this one, but the characters get a fitting send-off, with one last ride into the sunset together before the cast signatures on screen deliver a perfect finishing touch. Movie number 3 is a film I found on Amazon Prime, 1951's I Want You, a drama in which the principal characters struggle to reconcile desire and duty when rumors of war in Korea become a reality and young men start getting drafted into the military just 5 years after the end of the last war. This film boasts a great ensemble cast, headed by Dana Andrews, in a sense doing a follow-up to The Best Years of Our Lives, though there are a lot of differences between Martin Greer and Fred Derry. The film, which was directed by Mark Robson, does well at rotating its focus between the various characters, stressing the burdens placed on both men and women. It's the women who are the stronger ones here, the mother, the wife, the girlfriend, firm with their opinions and their words, and each actress, Dorothy McGuire, Mildred Dunnock, and Peggy Dow, has a moment that impresses. But Andrews, Farley Granger, and Robert Keith hold up their end as well, as does Walter Baldwin in a small role as a man who asks for an exemption letter for his son and is refused. Walter Baldwin, by the way, also had a role in Best Years as Homer's father. Ray Collins, Martin Milner, and Jim Backus also have key roles, and while the film doesn't dig as deep on the emotional level as Best Years, it does have parts that are touching and powerful. I Want You only takes things so far and then leaves you wondering about the future, but I understood that the particular story the film set out to tell had concluded, so while the ending might leave some viewers dissatisfied, I think it fits. Movie number 4 is 1999's Virus, an action/horror movie that's definitely not about a virus in the way that you might be thinking. A salvage team that's on the brink of mutiny against its captain encounters a Russian scientific research ship sitting dead in the water in the eye of a hurricane. When they board her, they find that the crew is dead, and they soon discover there's something malevolent waiting for them down below. This film is very light on original ideas, but it can be amusing if you go into it with appropriately low expectations, and engaging if its subject matter is something you're keen on. Donald Sutherland hams it up as a crazy Irish sea captain, and at a certain point I realized there was just one thing I wanted from this movie, and though it turned out to be short-lived, I got it, and thus I came away satisfied. It feels very 90s, and many silly and bombastic things happen, but it's all in keeping with the spirit of the thing. There's some really gross stuff, too, involving blood, guts, body parts. I can't say I was into that, but the nature of the antagonist was something I could get on board with. Among other things, it resembles The Terminator, Aliens, and The Abyss, and as it happens, some of James Cameron's crew was involved, Gail Ann Hurd as producer and John Bruno as director, and Cameron himself was thanked in the credits. In addition to Sutherland, the cast also stars Jamie Lee Curtis, William Baldwin, and Joanna Pacula. It's not a great movie, maybe not even a very good one, but my mom and I both found it an entertaining way to pass an hour and 40 minutes. Movie number 5 is 1954's Seven Samurai. Oh my goodness, I finally watched Seven Samurai! And you know what? It wasn't nearly as difficult or as daunting as I used to fear it would be. It helped that there's an intermission and a disc change, which gave us an obvious pausing point. I would have preferred to watch it all in one go, but 4 hours straight, or just under 4 hours, is too long for my mom to sit and watch a movie, and honestly, these days, it's too long for me, so we broke it up. Seven Samurai is director Akira Kurosawa's epic about a group of samurai hired by poor, desperate farmers to protect their village from a horde of bandits. I still have to say that samurai films aren't going to hold as much appeal for me as they do some people, since the historical setting and the samurai warrior culture just isn't something I'm drawn to. What do you know, we don't all have a preference for the same thing, but I did enjoy Seven Samurai, much more than I used to expect I might. Over the course of almost 4 hours, Kurosawa gradually introduces many characters who reveal hidden depths, private backstories, and secret motivations, who may be altered by the battle they face, or may forge strong bonds with their fellow warriors. Takeshi Shimura as the senior Ronin in particular is great, sagacious, kind, clever, and dependable, and of course Toshiro Mifune's part as the wild samurai wannabe is key. I was surprised to learn that his character wasn't originally part of the story. It was just about 6 sober samurai until the writers realized they needed someone undisciplined and crazy as a contrast. Kurosawa brought Mifune in and essentially gave him license to create his own character, and he went to town. He's definitely a scene stealer, incorporating some of the physical tics that show up in other Kurosawa films. His athleticism alone is impressive, the way he practically bounces all over the place. I could have done without seeing so much of his bum, though. Wow. He's the comic relief, and yet he's surprisingly complex. He often behaves foolishly, but he also has a strong, cunning streak and a reckless courage. It's a relatively simple narrative, but Kurosawa draws you in with compelling characters and words of wisdom before delivering a thrilling climactic sequence in the rain. His eye for the perfect shot is impeccable, as is the way he harnesses sunlight, wind, and rain. I also appreciate how he keeps things moving. There's an economy and swiftness in the flow from one scene to the next, which keeps the energy up. The scene where Mifune's character lures the scared farmers out of hiding and then mocks their cries for help was a favorite, and the scene with the woman in the bandit's hut is very effective. It's a short, simple moment, and she says nothing, but there is so much conveyed there. And now we move from the sublime to the ridiculous. Movie number 6 is 2010's The A-Team. It was Friday night, and I was trying to find something for me and my parents to watch on Prime, and I picked this. I soon wondered what on earth I'd gotten us into, and for a while I sat there thinking, what the heck is this? Is this a comedy? Is it like a comic book movie? And glancing nervously at my parents, trying to gauge their reaction. For starters, I wasn't aware it was based on the old A-Team TV show. though I should have guessed. It's pretty apparent based on the title. And the quick glance that I'd given at the summary, for some reason, had led me to expect a gritty action film about Iraqi war vets getting falsely accused and trying to clear their names. That last part is accurate, but the rest of it isn't. This is an action-heavy, heist-like adventure comedy that focuses on a ragtag quartet of crazy geniuses. What's surprising is that, as corny as it felt sometimes, with an Alan Silvestri score that needed to calm down, we ended up having fun. There's a certain point where you either need to stop watching or just allow the nuttiness to pull you in and basically force you to have a good time. Sure, it's totally unrealistic and kind of stupid, but the film embraces that, and it's a wild, entertaining ride that everybody in the cast seems to be enjoying. I think Liam Neeson would like to do more comedy, so it's nice to see him in a lighter role with some funny lines, and the dynamic between him and the other three guys, played by Bradley Cooper, Quentin Rampage Jackson, and a wonderfully zany Charlton Copley, is good, while the villains also ham it up. It also stars Jessica Biel, Patrick Wilson, and Gerald McRaney. It's a cheesy action movie, complete with excessive explosions, but with persistent dialogue patter and humor as well. Again, it's not something we were looking for, but there were a couple parts where all three of us ended up laughing, and there's something to be said for that. Movie number 7 is 1945's I Know Where I'm Going, a lovely film from Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, in which Wendy Hiller stars as a headstrong young woman with plans who sets out from London to an island in the Hebrides to marry her tycoon fiancé. The best-laid schemes of mice and men gang after glee, however. Inclement weather prevents her from making the final leg of the journey, and she has to stay at a house with a naval officer, played by Roger Livesey, who obligingly shows her the charm and appeal of his Scottish home, throwing a wrench in her plans in the process. This was a splendidly engaging film, which one of you recommended to me years ago. For no reason in particular, I never got around to it until now, and that's my loss. The only downside of this film is that it isn't in Powell and Pressburger's vibrant color, so we don't get to see the full glory of all those tartans. But the black and white photography is beautiful too. The cast is great, with an interesting supporting performance from Pamela Brown. The pace is quick and energetic from the get-go, with a humorous prologue playing out over a creative set of main titles. The premise is somewhat familiar, I've seen it in other films, but it's a warm and endearing story, pulling you into the romance as it develops against the heroine's stubborn will, and displaying all the allure of Scottish culture with its Gaelic, its superstitions, its castles, its kilts, and its bagpipes. My mom's really been into watching bagpipe and drum parades on YouTube lately, so this was timely, too. Do you know how many renditions of Scotland the Brave there are? And I think she's going to watch every single one of them. Movie number 8 is 2018's A Quiet Place. This was a rewatch for me, and I did a mini review of it back when I saw it the first time in the July 2018 compilation. This second viewing was in preparation for watching the sequel, and I liked it just as much as I did the first time. I think it hits all its marks, whether a moment is intended to be tense, scary, or heartbreaking. I love the smallness of its scale and the creativity of its storytelling, the way it begins after the world has ended and focuses on a small group of characters, just this one family trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic world of silence where a sudden noise will bring a monster galloping your way to deliver a quick but horrifying death. And in addition to the constant danger that hangs over them, and the sorrow of a happy, familiar world upended and lost, each of these characters is going through a lonely struggle with the heavy weight of grief. I appreciate also that it's such a personal film. Co-writer, director, and lead actor John Krasinski stars opposite his real-life wife Emily Blunt, and he wrote the story for their children. No wonder there's such a strong emphasis on family. I still really enjoy this one, and I'm pleased that it holds up. Movie number 9 then, well, actually it was 10 because we waited a few days and watched another film in between, but I'm shuffling the numbers a bit so that they can be back to back. Movie number 9 is A Quiet Place Part 2, which came out in March 2020 but didn't get a proper theatrical release until May 2021. This film is mostly a sequel, picking up immediately where the first one left off and following the family as they're forced to leave their home, but it's also partly a prequel, scenes in the first act giving us a glimpse of how the whole thing started. I really enjoyed Part 2, which is a relief, because you never know how things are going to go with a sequel. It helps a lot that the actors came back to continue their roles. Krasinski was again writing and directing, and a lot of the production crew was the same as well, only now they were working with 3 times the budget. That allowed them to include more people, more creatures, more locations, more sets, etc., while still working within the parameters set by the first film and continuing with a lot of the distinctive features that one had. For the most part, it maintains the intimate feel of the first one, although the unit ends up divided, with some characters staying behind while others go on a journey, and there are a couple scenes that go back and forth between 2 or 3 places as the separate groups approach a climactic moment. The first film had some of this element too, but here there's more plot mirroring. One of their smartest choices, I think, was the addition of Cillian Murphy to the cast as a prominent character. I remember watching the first teaser and feeling excited, but also feeling unsure about it, as I do about any unforeseen sequel. And then Cillian Murphy showed up, and my enthusiasm quadrupled. He's one of those actors that you can always count on for an arresting performance. It's a very tense film. There were a couple things that drove me a little crazy. I would make a prediction about something bad that was going to happen and then have to wait anxiously to see if I was right. The film's more spread out and has fewer gut-wrenching moments than the first one, but it was interesting to see a little more of this creature design and their fast and furious mode of attack. And Millicent Simmons as the deaf daughter brings another impressive and sensitive performance like she did in the first one, and her scenes with Cillian Murphy are the true heart of the film. I liked it a lot, and if/when a part 3 comes out, I'm on board with that, though it makes me nervous if they wait too long. Movie number 10 is 2008's Valkyrie, a dramatization of events leading up to and following the 1944 assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler, orchestrated by Colonel von Stauffenberg, played by Tom Cruise. I had seen this before. It was probably the same year that it came out, 2008, which was a long time ago, and when I noticed it on Prime, I realized that while I remembered I liked it, I couldn't recall many specifics, so we watched it again. On second viewing, I still think it's a very good film. I admit I had low expectations for Cruise in the role, but he does an admirable job as the man determined to save his country who comes up with a dangerous plan. Watching the film, you're always aware of the fact that the attempt will not be a success, but you get caught up in the planning and the maneuvering anyway, until the final act, when through a series of lamentable errors, it becomes a terrible tragedy. Cruise is surrounded by a top-notch cast of familiar faces. There's a ton of people in this movie. Bill Nighy, Tom Wilkinson, Terrence Stamp, Kenneth Branagh, Tom Hollander, Thomas Kretschmann, Eddie Izzard, to name a few, and David Bamber makes a few brief appearances as Hitler. The worst I can say about it is that it was directed by Bryan Singer, who's allegedly a creep, but I won't hold that against the film. It's a well-crafted, grounded thriller that does snip a few corners here and there to make it a more concise and dramatic experience, but nevertheless, it's an effective and powerful story. Movie number 11 is 1978's Capricorn One, which has the distinction of being the last film my parents saw together in the theater before having kids completely took over their lives. Because they always laugh whenever it comes up, I got the idea a long time ago that it was a funny movie. However, though it has some humorous parts, it is not a comedy. Capricorn One is a sci-fi thriller in which the three men on a mission to Mars, James Brolin, Sam Waterston, and O.J. Simpson, are pulled out of the shuttle just before liftoff and conveyed to a secret location. They're informed by their NASA superior, Hal Holbrook, that instead of actually going to Mars, they're going to televise a fake landing on a soundstage. And if they refuse to comply, there will be serious consequences for their families. It's a crazy premise, but the idea of a deep-rooted conspiracy being set up to dupe the American public, with federal agents standing by to take care of anyone who threatens to get out of line, I don't know, isn't that far-fetched. I also found myself wondering if this film had any influence on the rise of moon landing conspiracy theories, so I did a little quick research, meaning I looked it up on Wikipedia. Apparently, the first official claim that the moon landing was faked was made in 1976, 2 years before this film's release, in a book by Bill Kaysing. However, writer and director Peter Hyams got his idea independently while working on moon landing broadcasts at CBS and seeing just how easy it would be to deceive people like this. He wrote the script for Capricorn One in 1972, 4 years before Kaysing's book came out. Anyway, it's got a big cast, Elliot Gould starring alongside the aforementioned actors as a rather lazy reporter who stumbles on this huge story. Brenda Vaccaro has a significant role as well and deserves props for pulling off an emotional scene while reading Dr. Seuss's Fox and Socks. Other highlights include the main titles, with their striking and surprisingly legible red font, backed by Jerry Goldsmith's thrilling opening theme, brief but entertaining appearances by Karen Black and Telly Savalas, a sequence with a speeding car that made me feel sick, the neat way 2 helicopters are filmed to give them sinister personalities, and an insane chase scene between a crop duster biplane and those same helicopters. The one thing I really didn't like was a prolonged scene with a rattlesnake. Ugh. I do think there are parts here and there that could have been a bit better. Certain characters and relationships could have gelled more, some dialogue could have been smoother, but overall, I enjoyed it. I've got one more, and it's a blast from the past. Movie number 12 is 1996's Night of the Twisters. This made-for-TV movie stars Devon Sawa and John Schneider and focuses on a horrific outbreak of tornadoes in Nebraska, where a teenage boy must protect his baby brother and go searching through the devastated town for his missing parents. I don't know how many times I saw this movie as a child, but it was a lot. My eldest sister had read the book by Ivy Ruckman, and then when the film aired on TV, my mom taped it. She's always up for a wacky weather movie, so this was right up her alley. We did buy it once on VHS, but that tape was defective and wouldn't play, so I always saw the one that we had taped off TV. This time, though, we watched it on YouTube. Between this and Twister, which came out the same year and I've also seen many times, I got a lot of scary tornado exposure as a kid. While Night of the Twisters, which was directed by Timothy Bond, had a much smaller budget, I think it did a pretty good job with the effects and the disaster sequences. It's got a definite 90s vibe with the hair and clothes and lots of Canadian accents, and there's some teenage boy doofiness in the first part, but it's a decent coming-of-age story, and it's got a nice message about family and trust. I do think they should have mentioned in the beginning that, like the book, it was inspired by a real event. I think that's kind of important, and I had no suspicion of that fact until the epilogue. There's one part where it seems like something was taken out. Tornadoes show up and everyone dives for cover, there's a pause for a commercial break, and when we come back, everything's fine. And the part where a tornado's nipping at the Jeep's heels as it races for cover was exciting when I was a kid, and now it seems kind of ridiculous. But all in all, I was impressed with how well this still holds up, and it's amazing how many images have stayed with me over the years. The scene burned into my memory the most is the one with the baby's room, the empty crib, the frantic search, and the glimpse of the tornado through the window on its way to tear the house apart. It gave me the heebie-jeebies when I was little, and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies now. And that's what else I saw in March. I told you I had some great movies to talk about. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and if you have any thoughts on any of the films that I mentioned, go ahead and share those in the comments below. I look forward to reading what you all have to say, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.